Okay, this video is simply the second day of section 4.4, which is graphing a function rule. So today we are going to graph some more, and I can graph equations that represent functions. So today we're going to look at some nonlinear functions. So if we take a look at this first one, we're going to make the t-charts the same way that we have been doing. So on the first one, it says y equals the absolute value of x minus a 4. So if I put in a -2, I'd have the absolute value of a -2 minus 4, which is a +2, minus a 4, which is going to give me a -2. So it would be a -2, -2. If I put in a 1, I'd have the absolute value of a -1 minus 4. The absolute value of a -1 is 1. 1 minus 4 is -3. So I'd have the ordered pair -1, -3. If I put in a 0, I have the absolute value of 0 minus a 4, which is just 0 minus 4, which is a -4. So I'd have the ordered pair 0, -4. If I put in a 1, I'd have the absolute value of 1 minus 4, which is really the absolute value of 1 is a 1, minus 4 is a -3. So I'd have a 1, -3. And the last one, if I put in a 2, absolute value of 2 is 2, minus 4 is a -2. So I would have a 2, -2. If I came over here and graphed this thing, here's what it would look like. I'd have a -2, -2. I'd have a -1, -3. I'd have a 0, -4. I'd have a 1, -3. I'd have a 2, -2. So I'd have this graph like so. Okay, so that would be the graph of this absolute value equation. Okay, second one. If I had this equation, y equals x squared plus 1. So x squared plus 1. So I'm going to have a -2 squared plus 1. Well, a -2 squared is a +4. Plus 1 gives me 5. So my ordered pair would be a -2, 5. Next one, if I take a -1 and I square it, I would get a 1. Plus the 1 is going to give me a 2. So my ordered pair would be a -1, 2. Next one, if I put in a 0 and square it, I'm still going to have 0. Plus 1 is going to be a 1. So I'd have a 0, 1 for an ordered pair. If I put in a 1 on the next one, I'd have a 1 squared, which is 1. Plus 1 is 2. So I'd have the ordered pair 1, 2. And last one, if I take a 2 and I square it, would be a 4. Plus the 1 is going to give me a 5. So I'd have the ordered pair 2, 5. So this one would look something like this: a -2, 5, a 1, -2, a 0, 1, a 1, 2, and a 2, 5. So this one's going to be a curve that we'll call a parabola. Okay, so if you want to just pause the video, try and figure out a t-chart for this one, and then think about what the graph would look like, and then play her and see if you get it right. So we've got the absolute value of an x minus 3. So this would be the absolute value of a -2 minus 3. So inside I'd get a -5, but the absolute value of that is a +5. So I'd have a -2, 5. If I plug in a -1, I'd have a -1 minus 3, which is a -4, but the absolute value of that is +4. So I'd have a -1, +4. If I put in a 0, I'd have a 0 minus 3, which is -3. The absolute value of that is +3. So I'd have the ordered pair 0, 3. Next one, if I put in a 1, I'd have a 1 minus 3, which is -2. But the absolute value of that is a +2. So I'd have the ordered pair 1, 2. And the last one, if you put in a 2, 2 minus 3 is a -1, but the absolute value of that is a +1. So my ordered pair would be a 2, 1. So for this one, I'd have this graph like so: a -2, 5, a -1, 4, a 0, 3, a 1, 2, a 2, 1. So that would be my graph there. Okay, if you continued it out, you'd end up with a graph that bounces back at this point, and you'd have this for a graph. Okay, next one, if you have a negative x squared plus 2. Now, keep in mind my negative is outside of my x squared. So this would look like this, a negative 2 squared plus 2. So negative 2 squared is positive 4, but this negative makes it a negative 4. So I got a negative 4 plus 2, which is a negative 2. So I got negative 2, negative 2. The negative again, a negative 1 squared plus 2. So negative 1 squared is positive 1. This negative makes it negative, so it's going to be negative 1 plus 2, which is a positive 1. So I'd have a negative 1, positive 1. If you put in a 0, I'd have a 0 squared, which is 0, plus 2 is a 2. So I got a 0, 2. If you put in a 1, I'd have a negative 1 squared. So 1 squared is 1, but the negative makes it a negative 1. Plus 2 gives me a 1. So I'd have a 1, 1. If I have a 2, I have a 2 squared, which is 4, so I got a negative 4 plus 2 gives me a negative 2. So I'd have a 2, negative 2. If I graph that one, a negative 2, 2, a negative 1, 1, a 0, 2. Oh, I see my error. I've got a negative 2, negative 2. Here we are. We got a negative 1, positive 1. We got a 0, 2. We got a 1, 1. We got a 2, negative 2. So we end up with this parabola. Okay, hopefully we get the idea. Again, we're just making T-charts and graphing. So that is a wrap.